to the world. Welcome to Under the Wire, your home for censored and suppressed information about vaccinations and health. My name is Meryl Dory, and I would like to welcome you here this evening. I am hoping that I'm actually going live on YouTube. If you happen to be watching me on YouTube, would you mind dropping a quick comment so I can see that it's actually working? I have not been able to stream to YouTube for well over a year with the Australian Vaccination Network, and now that I've got my own YouTube channel, I'm hoping, praying, crossing my fingers that it's actually working. If you are watching on YouTube, could I please ask a big favor? Can you hit that like and subscribe button so that you will get notified whenever the show is about to start? And I see that I am live on Rumble, which is fantastic. That's one thing that's working. It's always a shock when something works. Tonight we have a show that's about, I guess, personal responsibility. That's what I'd like to call it, because right now we are in a situation where, there's a time when things can go one way or the other, and all it takes is a little bit of a push to actually get things going the wrong way, or a little bit of a push to get things going the right way. And I'm hoping that together we can do that push the right way to get things going. I don't know how many of you follow my Substack. It's informedchoice.substack.com. But on Substack for the last couple of weeks, I've been closely watching and covering a situation that's taking place in Australia. There are two government departments. One of them is the E-Safety Commission, and the other one is ACMA, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Now, ACMA has always been a bit of a paper tiger. They really couldn't or wouldn't do anything to enforce their own regulations on advertising, on truth in programming, any of that stuff. But in January this year, 2023, the government expanded ACMA's powers, and it there are so many things that can be used for good or can be used for bad. Hi John, it's good to see you here. Are you on YouTube by any chance? I'm hoping that you're watching from YouTube, because I don't think you could be watching on Facebook, though who knows, miracles have happened. Maybe possibly someone can actually see this on Facebook. So the issue is that ACMA, oh hi, South Australia, lovely to see you. Solar Diver, I like that. So yeah, the issue is that ACMA has been given expanded powers in January this year, so that they're no longer going to be a paper tiger, and they're looking for yet further powers. Oh, thank you, John. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. John's watching on YouTube. That's fantastic. So, the the powers that they've been given are powers to censor uh, through the use of fines for social media platforms that allow what the government refers to as mis or disinformation. And they specifically mention, talk about vaccination that goes against government policy, people who come out and tell conspiracy theories about the voice to parliament. So anyone who disagrees with the government in any way is going to be called someone who is spreading mis or disinformation. Oh, Kate, lovely to see you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're tuned in on YouTube. That's brilliant. It's so nice to be able to get some feedback, because for the last few months I couldn't see anything because Facebook wasn't airing the show. And Rumble, even though people can see it on Rumble, I don't see their comments until afterwards. So that's great. Thank you so much for letting me know. So ACMA has been given those new powers, and they're getting expanded powers if we don't comment. I think there's about 32 or 33 days left for commenting. On my Substack, which again is informedchoice.substack.com, I've posted probably 30 or so letters that people who have made submissions have put in. And what I'd like to suggest, we're going to talk a little bit about what the problems are with this new proposed legislation. Um, but if you feel so moved, then I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes. If you don't have your own words, you can go to my Substack page, find the post on the submissions that have been sent in, and feel free to copy and paste anything out of those submissions, but try not to make your submission the exact same thing as someone else's, because when that happens, both submissions will be discounted. So by all means, take a piece here, a piece there, put your name and contact details on it, and put the submission in. There are links on the page. There's all the information that you need. We need to be taking action against this because it is quite serious when the government is saying that you do not have the right to speak. So here, this is taken directly from the page that's talking about the new powers for ACMA. And they've got the definition. Misinformation and disinformation pose a threat to the safety and well-being of Australians, as well as to our democracy, society, and economy. How ironic is that? Saying that mis and disinformation, as judged by whom? Is the government going to be judging what is true and what is not? Because what the government is doing in most cases is they are actually saying, if you disagree with me and you speak about it, then that is mis or disinformation. And I don't think that the term democracy can possibly be used when there is no support or freedom or respect for speech. The proposed powers would enable ACMA to gather information from digital platform providers or require them to keep certain records about matters regarding disinformation and misinformation. So in other words, they're going to turn Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and all these platforms into yet more spies for the government. So they can go and say, this person with this fake name was just posting something about the voice to Parliament or about the harms inherent in COVID jabs. We want you to tell us who they are, and we want you to do it now. Otherwise, we're going to fine you $700,000 a day. Yes, $700,000 a day. Enable ACMA to request industry develop a code of practice covering measures to combat misinformation and disinformation on digital platforms, which the ACMA could register and enforce. So they're going to make the social media platforms basically complicit in their abuse towards people who are speaking truth. So let's say they're going to make Facebook develop yet more algorithms that will look for certain words, certain terms, and if those algorithms find those words, then they can report to ACMA. ACMA can then go in and find the people who are using those terms, sharing them, saying something, and can find them. And I don't know what they're going to do to them. I don't know what their powers are going to be in that regards, but it's threatening. It's definitely threatening. And allow ACMA to create and enforce an industry standard, a stronger form of regulation, should a code of practice be deemed ineffective in combating misinformation and disinformation on digital platforms. So what that industry standard is it going to include jail terms or fines for the people who are speaking this so-called mis and disinformation? I don't know, but I can tell you that it's a real concern, and it's the sort of thing that you'd expect to happen in communist China or North Korea, not in Australia. Now this is directly from the legislation, this section here. ACMA may, by written notice given to the person, require the person, so this is the person who's posted on social media, to give to ACMA within the period and in the manner and form specified in the notice any such information, or to produce to ACMA within the period and in the manner specified in the notice any such documents, to make copies of any such documents, and to produce to ACMA within the period and the manner specified in the notice those copies. If the person is an individual, to appear before ACMA at a time and place specified in the notice. So they've actually been given basically subpoena powers to make you appear before them. And if the person is a body corporate or a public body, to cause a competent officer of the body to appear before ACMA at a time and place specified in the notice to give any such evidence, either orally or in writing, and produce any such documents. So basically, ACMA has the right of subpoena. We don't know what punishments they can levy on people, but they can get your private documents, they can ask for photographs, they can ask for just about anything. It gives ACMA almost unlimited power over all aspects of our public life, our speech, whatever we talk about. And you know, it's quite scary to think that we will lose all sense of privacy. But don't worry, there are exclusions. There are people who will not be subject to these new regulations. And those people include anyone who works for the government, the Commonwealth, a state, or a territory, or a local government. So your shire councils, your state governments, your territory governments, and anyone who works for the Commonwealth is not subject to any of these pesky rules, nor will mainstream media. It says approved, I think, professional news content. So if you call what you're doing for the purposes of entertainment, parody, or satire, it looks like there could be a loophole there. But when it comes to the media, that you have to be approved by the government. You have to be someone who the government has deemed is a real media outlet. Sorry, Rebel News, I don't think you're going to be in this. Sorry, sorry, I'm just trying to think of some of the other less mainstream. The Voice in Australia, the Light newspaper. I don't think that they will be approved. Cairns News, I doubt they'll be approved. ANR, Australian National Review, I don't think they'll be approved. But I think that the Melbourne Age and the Australian and the Sydney Morning Herald and the Courier Mail, they'll all be able to say whatever they want, because they wouldn't dare oppose anything the government says when they are actually a government mouthpiece. They are not a news organization. They are a propaganda organization. So they'll probably be fine with this, absolutely fine. And the censorship is already really bad in Australia. It's terrible. As I said, the AVN got kicked off of YouTube well over a year ago. I was kicked off of LinkedIn. My personal account was kicked off of LinkedIn. I hardly ever even posted there. I was kicked off of Twitter, and I only got my account back when Elon Musk took it over. So, you know, we already have bad censorship. Imagine how bad it will be when ACMA, if ACMA is allowed to do this. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of John Ruddick. He's just taken a seat in the New South Wales House, the New South Wales Parliament, and he made an amazing maiden speech. I was lucky enough to see it on YouTube, and the reason I say I was lucky enough to see it is that YouTube actually took it down. Think about this. This is a sitting member of Parliament in a country that supposedly, ostensibly, has freedom of political speech, and he made his speech. I don't know what he said that got YouTube off sides, but his speech was taken down, and it will be put up probably on Rumble, on other places as well. But this is what we're up against before ACMA's powers are expanded. What will it be like later on? And censorship has become a part of Australian society. For those of you who don't know, I gave a talk in Mullumbimby, New South Wales last week. It's the second time I've spoken for this group. It's called Politics in the Pub, and I was not to talk about vaccination. I was talking about 15-minute ghettos, lockdowns, the surveillance society, not about vaccination, though of course I did end up touching on it. It just seems to happen that way. And this is from my Substack page. There was someone who was there on the night because what happened was um, the pub that we were supposed to be doing the talk in, which is the Courthouse Hotel in Mullumbimby, they canceled about 4 hours before this event was supposed to take place. Nothing like last minute, right? And the woman who organized it spoke with him and said, "Why are you canceling? We have all these people coming, and we can't cancel on such short notice." And he said that they got complaints from members of the community, one of whom claimed that her child died from whooping cough, and it was because of me, and she was very upset that I'd be allowed to speak. Now, I don't have a guarantee that I know who this person is, but I would bet 99 out of 100 that it was someone by the name of Tony McCaffrey, whose daughter Dana passed away in 2009, I'm pretty sure. So, quite some time ago. And Tony and her husband David have blamed the AVN and me personally for the fact that there is a low vaccination rate in this area. So she did not want me to speak, and she felt that by stopping the pub from hosting this event, she would be able to prevent me from speaking. Sadly for Tony and David McCaffrey, if it was them, I don't know that, I can't swear to it, but if it was them, the organizer was able to arrange another venue at the very last minute. I'm telling you, they worked really hard. They called a lot of places that were all booked out, but they found a wonderful venue, and the event went on. We had a great crowd, and what the people in the venue who came said is that they will never again frequent the Courthouse Hotel. One woman had a table reserved for 13 people, and they were all going to have dinner, they were going to have drinks, and instead they came out to the new venue and they watched me speak, but they didn't have dinner or drinks. And I think that what the hotel did was foolhardy, and they basically bit off their nose to spite their face, because yes, maybe some people would have gotten upset because they don't like freedom of speech. They don't like living in a country where people are entitled to say what they feel, as long as they're not threatening someone else or using hate speech. But many, many more people would oppose what they did. And Mullumbimby has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the country, from what I understand. I never trust government statistics because governments lie left, right, and center. But I do believe that they did the wrong thing, and quite a few people have written to the Courthouse Hotel and have told them how angry they were about this. Now, if you, again, feel like writing a quick note to the Courthouse, let's try that again, to the Courthouse Hotel in Mullumbimby, you can go to my Substack, again, informedchoice.substack.com, and you can get the details for the Courthouse Hotel and drop them a quick line. Be polite if you do that, and just tell them about why you feel what they did was wrong. So there are two actions that you can take. The most important one, however, is writing a submission to ACMA. And when I say submission, I'm not asking for you to write a 45-page document with diagrams and charts and graphs and everything. No, you can just write a quick paragraph or two and tell ACMA why you support freedom of speech and why you oppose anyone, especially them, trying to determine what is mis and disinformation when they didn't get anything right. The government didn't get anything right through the entire scamdemic. They made one mistake after another. So if they're going to judge mis or disinformation, look at home first. Look at what they've been doing. And that is the definition of mis and disinformation. I'm going to share a very quick video from the real Rukshan. I don't know if you know him, but he's on Facebook, he's on Twitter. I don't know if he's on other platforms as well. But he's a very good filmmaker, and he has a really clear take on what is happening in Australia with censorship. I hope you'll enjoy this.
Over the last couple of days, it's become very apparent to me that we in Australia, you and I, we are at the forefront of a battle for internet freedom, for freedom of speech, for the freedom of political communication, the right to share ideas, and the rights of internet freedom that we in our modern societies should have, distinct from the involvement of the government. The biggest part of the internet and the most interesting part of the internet is the ability for humans, for us, to share ideas with each other, to tell our governments to get stuffed, to organize protests, to do all these type of activities that back in the day we would have done in our communities at town halls. But now the internet is the town square, right? The internet is the town hall in many ways. People do get together in communities in one way or another online and make differences in our world, and they make positive changes. Sometimes it's challenging, the scenarios that arise from people gathering together online, but overall the fact that people can do this is a very powerful part of our human nature, which is now being expressed online. Now, there is nothing more that our government would like to do than diminish the ability of people to have this means of communication. And that is why I believe in Australia, we are at the forefront of this battle, because over the last couple of days, we have seen how involved our government is in clamping down on these rights. These government people will tell you that they're doing this to keep you safe. But I'm telling you, there are many people out there who are looking at this, from all experts to just the layman like you and I, who are looking at this, and we can see it for what it is. And it's increasingly appearing like our governments in the West, in particular in countries like Australia, is running rampant. And we are the test case for a lot of this stuff, because they can just push it through with their numbers in their parliaments, pretend to play the whole democratic process. But at the end of the day, what they are doing is clamping down on our ability to communicate with each other and to hold them accountable. People often bring up George Orwell's 1984, this dystopian novel that highlighted the possibilities of such a world. And always we bring up this example, and sometimes people will laugh and mock you for bringing up this example. But increasingly, it does appear that our governments are involved in trying to create some sort of ministry of truth, where they decide what you and I know to be true, right? They are the ultimate judges of what is misinformation and disinformation in this new ministry that they're attempting to set up. They might not use those words. They'll call it the communications bill or the online safety bill. It's always got some nice ring to it, which sounds quite meek, but it's got a lot of teeth. And the way that these things are set up, it is going to drastically change our relationship with the internet and our relationship that we have all fostered with each other on these platforms. Because the sneaky people in the government will tell you, actually, this legislation is designed in such a way that we don't actually decide what piece of content gets removed, deleted, or which account is suspended for spreading misinformation. We're not involved in that. We're just setting industry codes. We're just setting standards for companies to follow to keep all of you Australians safe on the internet. One way or another, the government is going to push this stuff through. But right now, at this stage, all of us, we can submit requests into this. The individual, you and I, we can get involved in this process and ensure that our voices are heard. But I have a feeling that the way that this stuff is going, we're going to see people on the streets protesting, and we're going to see perhaps civil disobedience, because I think this is one of those type of fights where the individual has to make a stand in terms of how far the government is going to take this. Because if you don't, they're just going to take it all the way. And a few years from now, you'll be looking back and thinking, how did I end up where I can't even talk about this topic online anymore? And my account is deleted, right? You will get flashbacks of what it's been like over the last couple of years, when big tech, in cooperation with the government, without any of these laws, did this. But imagine then, with these laws and the cooperation of big tech, how they will silence voices of dissent in the future.
So yeah, I think that what Rukshan said there is so spot on, so perfect, because imagine how much worse it's going to get if we allow this to go through. And I hope it doesn't reach the point where we will be marching in the streets again, and committing acts of civil disobedience. But if that's what it takes to protect our freedoms, then that might be what we have to do. And the government should be warned that I think people will do that to protect their rights and the rights of their families and their community. Nobody wants to actually be part of a system that is going to enslave the people, even to the point of telling us what we can and cannot say. And it'll start online, but it will reach the point, like it has in China, like it does in North Korea, like it was in the former Soviet Union, where you cannot speak, where people will turn you in for what you're saying. And you'll be dobbed in. We saw that with COVID. People were, neighbors were dobbing in neighbors, family members were dobbing in family members. It brought out the absolute worst in some people, and it will again if we allow this to go through. And I personally feel, and you may or may not agree with me on this, but I personally feel that all of this is coordinated internationally. These regulations that are coming in, they're coming straight as if Klaus Schwab had said them himself, as if he'd written, the World Economic Forum had written them. They are being introduced in more or less the same words in so many countries around the world, even in countries that have protections in legislation for speech, like the United States, like the UK. We don't even have that in Australia. Our constitution's very deficient. I've probably spoken about that so many times, but the fact is that these things are coordinated internationally. And I feel that part of what COVID was brought in for, because it was a plandemic, it was not a pandemic, and again, we can talk and argue about this, that's my opinion. What it was brought in for was to increase the control of the government, of the World Economic Forum, of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, over the people. And one of the ways of doing that is through chaos, real chaos. And right now, we're seeing chaos across Europe. In the Netherlands, for over a year now, the government has been saying that they're going to close down over 3,000 family-run farms. Now, the Netherlands is one of the most efficient farming countries in the world. I think they're number 3 in the production of food. The Ukraine is one of the other ones, and so is Russia. So, at a time when we have terrible weather problems that are causing declines in food production around the world, where we have a series of very suspicious explosions and fires at food production facilities. One fire, I think it was in Texas, that killed 16,000 cattle. How does that even happen? How can one, I don't know if it was a fire or an explosion, kill that many cattle? Avian influenza supposedly was a problem in the United States, and instead of allowing chickens to die if they got sick from it, they went in and killed hundreds of thousands or millions, hundreds of millions of chickens, leading to a huge problem with chickens and eggs in that country. So chaos is being sown by our governments, and nowhere can we see that quite as clearly as in France. Yes, John, it's absolutely a scam. For the last 5 days now, there have been massive riots in France. There are entire blocks that have been there since the Middle Ages that are now burnt to the ground. There was, now, again, you may not agree with me, but there was uncontrolled immigration into France from North Africa, from other countries in the Middle East. And when you bring in, I don't know how many people, hundreds of thousands of people who are not going to assimilate into your society, and it becomes a little bit of a powder keg just waiting to explode. And France had its George Floyd moment when a 17-year-old And I don't even know if he was an immigrant, to be honest with you, but a 17-year-old was shot by the police. I don't know what the circumstances were, but I do know that the reaction or the overreaction to those circumstances is shocking. And the only good thing that's coming out of this is the French people are standing up and they're saying Macron has to go. And he does have to go. And the French have never been backwards in coming forwards to protest. They're very good at it. So, in France, they're doing this. In the Netherlands, the farmers are once again blocking the roads with their tractors and saying they're not going to be kicked off of their farms. Um, and it's pretty amazing that this is happening there. From what I understand, this violence has spread from France to Belgium and to Switzerland as well. So we are seeing Europe being engulfed in violence and protests and burning, and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I do believe very strongly that all of this was planned. Whether or not it can be controlled, I don't know, but it was planned because chaos is good for controlling people. When you get people into a state of fear, they look to the government to save them. And the government will say, we'll save you, but there's going to be a cost. You have to do what we say. You have to not be able to speak out loud. You have to, not have freedoms. And we have a woman, I forget her name, she's the head of the E-Safety Commission in Australia. She sounds American, but I'm not sure if she is. She lived in the United States for a while. And she said that our freedoms may have to be recalibrated. She said that when she was speaking at a World Economic Forum conference. She said that our freedoms may have to be recalibrated for our safety. You know what? Don't keep me safe. Just give me my freedoms. I'll keep myself safe, and the community will keep itself safe as well. So we are at a time of incredible flux. And as I said, it can go one way or the other. As Rukshan said, we will either make our voices heard and the government will heed what we say, or there's going to be trouble. There's going to be real trouble. So with France, liberté, égalité, fraternité, vive la France, absolutely. I find myself breaking out into the Marseillaise at the most unusual times. It's true, as an American, France was the reason that we actually won, I think, the war against the British. And maybe I shouldn't say that in Australia, where so many people are descended from the British and still think of Americans as rebels. But the French believe strongly in freedom. That's part of their credo. And Macron, instead of taking the situation in hand and saying we've got to do something about this, what he's come out, it's almost as if it's planned. I just don't get it. He's come out and blamed social media for chaos and the breakdown of law and order in France. And he says authorities will take steps to remove sensitive content and identify those who call for disorder. And disorder, I guess, means calling for him to step down. Because the people who are on social media talking about how disaffected they've been by the country or by the immigration problems or by whatever, they're not the problem. The problem is the people out in the streets looting and killing people and beating up innocent people. They're the problem. And Macron is talking about trying to do something on Facebook, on social media. Forget about it. This man deserves to be pushed out of office. Bring back the guillotine, I say. And I'm not threatening violence. I'm just saying that there is a revolution going on right now in France, and we don't want it to end the way the last revolution ended, with the guillotine and with everyone being, their heads being chopped off. But people need to be heard, and people need to know that their government is representing them and not some superpower like the World Economic Forum or the Rothschilds or some other major very wealthy donor like the Gates Foundation. That's not who Macron is supposed to be representing. He's supposed to represent the French people. And quite interestingly, I'm not sure if he's a president, but the leader of Poland put out a video a couple of days ago comparing Poland, which basically hasn't had uncontrolled immigration, with France. And they show people walking down the streets in Poland and shopping, and everything is peaceful and beautiful. And then they've got video of France where everything is burning. And when one country does that to another country, you can really see that they're pushing they're pushing that line, that there's obviously something that France is doing that's wrong, otherwise they wouldn't be in this situation. Now, speaking of Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I don't know how many of you have heard this, but there's been 4 cases of malaria in Florida and Texas, which are 2 states that about a year ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, now this says 2018. Yes, well, you know that David's going to win. David always wins, Kate. Kate asked who won, David versus Goliath. We must win this, and we will win this. Hopefully we'll win it quickly and as painlessly as possible. So this says 2018, but I'm pretty sure that this was really done a year ago. Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation released millions of genetically modified mosquitoes in Florida and Texas at the beginning of the summer when it's the hottest there. And these genetically modified mosquitoes, this says that they were carrying the Zika virus, but they also released mosquitoes that carried some kind of malaria parasite. And malaria is a mosquito-borne illness, and these mosquitoes were released. Now, the same thing was done in far north Queensland, and it's been done quite a few times in far north Queensland. What they're trying to do in far north Queensland, and I don't know if this is what they were doing in Texas and Florida, but what they were trying to do was basically to sterilize the mosquitoes. I think they're called Anopheles or Anopheles mosquitoes, the ones who carry malaria. So these genetically modified mosquitoes couldn't breed, and so they were hoping that the malaria-carrying mosquitoes would breed with them, and therefore they would all die out. It's kind of a crazy idea, but they never asked for the people's permission who lived there. But in Australia, the Office of the Gene Technology Regulator, bless their cotton socks, gave them permission, and it was done without the knowledge of the people in Darwin and Cairns where they did it. So in this situation, mosquitoes were released in Florida and Texas, 2 states, and they were the only states where these things were released. And wouldn't you know it, malaria cases discovered in Florida and Texas for the first time in 20 years. And prior to that, malaria, when it was found, it was found in people who'd returned from South America or Africa, where malaria is endemic, or India, someplace where malaria actually is common. So it was not that 20 years ago there were cases of malaria that were native to Florida and Texas. It's that 20 years ago there were travelers that came back and they brought back malaria with them. So nobody's asking the question of where these cases came from, and there are only 4 cases so far, but this is front page news, not the 35,000 deaths after the COVID jab or the hundreds of thousands of reactions after the COVID jab. That's not front page news, but 4 cases of malaria in Florida and Texas is front page news. Is malaria going to be the next pandemic? I doubt it, because malaria is not an infectious disease. The mosquito bites someone and they have malaria, and then they bite someone else and deposit the parasite that causes malaria into that second person. So it's totally mosquito borne. If I have it, I can't give it to you. You can't give it to me. But again, it's fear porn. And thank you, Kate. Absolutely. There are, interestingly, two known treatments in the drug world for malaria, and they're both treatments and preventatives. And wouldn't you want to know it, ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are both accepted antiparasitics for malaria. Of course, there is also wormwood, which is an incredibly effective natural therapy. And I forget what the homeopathic version is called, but it's a homeopathic version of wormwood. And it is, there are ways of treating it, there are ways of preventing it, but the government is already ordering malaria vaccines, which have never been found to work. In fact, they admitted in an article that I read recently that the effectiveness of these jabs is 30%, which means anything less than 50% is completely ineffective. So it really and truly beggars belief that that this is what would be happening. And as usual, our buddy Bill is right at the bottom of it. I don't know how many of you heard today, but Biden or whoever is pulling his strings today has said that he would be not be averse to allowing Bill Gates to block the sun from reaching the earth over the United States through the use of geoengineering. And he's been doing that for ages anyway. In the EU, they are asking for, and the EU Parliament is asking for an inquiry into the risks of geoengineering. Hallelujah, finally. They are actually trying to find out what's going on. Okay, so, same thing. See, this is the article on this actual subject, where before that was just a picture, and this is the article that talked about the fact that that the vaccine is only 30% effective. It says malaria is a mosquito-borne disease that leads to about 241 million infections worldwide every year. Now, they have no idea how many people are infected with malaria. That is computer modeling done by the World Health Organization, worst case scenario figures, and it's not based on anything. They pull that number out of their nether regions. The disease is relatively rare in the U.S., and that this is also where they talk about the fact that most cases in the U.S. Are brought back from overseas travelers. And you know what? Again, I'd love to know, those overseas travelers, did they take the malaria preventative before they went overseas? Because most people, when they go to these countries where malaria is endemic, they'll go to a travel vaccine clinic and they'll get the malaria jab, and then they come back and they get malaria anyway. Bad luck. All right, so I'm going to share a very quick video here with Dr. Peter McCullough, who most of you would know, brilliant guy, and he is testifying. I think this is in Pennsylvania, but it's in the United States. I'm not sure exactly where.
Did I understand you to say that most who had died from COVID were the vaccinated, not the unvaccinated, or did I mishear what you said?
In the UK, Australia, South Africa, where they have good data systems, you know, the contemporary, let's say late 2021 and 2022, the majority who have been hospitalized and died are fully vaccinated. So right now, New South Wales just put out their data. Now, Australia is interesting because they had pre-vaccinated the whole country and then COVID got there late. So Australia was the real test of whether or not the vaccines would work, and they failed colossally. So the most recent analysis, 99% of people hospitalized and died are fully vaccinated. United States, our CDC tracked these breakthrough infections. They tracked, people reported to the CDC, May 1st of 2021, the CDC was overwhelmed with fully vaccinated Americans who were being hospitalized and died. They gave up. They put a notice on their website. They said, we gave up. We cannot track breakthrough infections. The vaccine was failing so badly.
Okay, so that was in 2021. They knew the vaccine was failing. It's now mid-2023, right? It's July 2023. The government in Australia is still recommending in advertising that young people, old people, infants, and children still get these death jabs. Why are they doing that? I guess because they have contracts, that's the only thing I'm thinking. They've signed contracts to purchase a certain number of jabs and they have to do it. They're throwing away an enormous number of jabs and not telling people about it. Now, here is UK data for 2022 week 13, and this shows you now what you have here is rates among people vaccinated with at least 3 doses of the COVID jab per 100,000, rates among people not vaccinated per 100,000, and then the vaccine effectiveness. Now, the highest effectiveness was people under the age of 18, and that effectiveness was 15%. Now, in order to get this jab approved, it needed to show an efficacy of at least 50%. And here we have 15% in the youngest and the healthiest. But look at the other age groups. When you have a negative efficacy, see it's in red and with a minus sign next to it, 18 to 29, negative efficacy of 231%. That means that if you are given at least 3 jabs, you have a 231% increased risk of getting COVID than if you were not vaccinated against it. In 30 to 39, 298. And the older you get, up until the age of 80, the higher the risk goes. 70 to 79 is slightly lower than 60 to 69. But every single one of these age groups, with the exception of under 18, has a negative efficacy. This is publicly available data. Have you seen this printed on the cover of the Australian? Have you seen it in the Medical Journal of Australia or in Australian Doctor Weekly? Have you seen any coverage of this shocking statistic showing that people who get these jabs are more likely to get COVID than those who are not jabbed? And as Dr. McCullough said, until they stopped reporting the data, and New South Wales stopped reporting the data in December 2022, they just completely stopped reporting it. But up until that point, 99% of the people who were in hospital, who were in ICU, and who died with COVID or from COVID or whatever you want to call it, were fully vaccinated. And the more doses of the jab they'd gotten, the more likely they were to die. So this is not a vaccination campaign. This is not a health policy. This is knowingly murdering people, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm going to get banned off of YouTube so fast it's going to make your head spin, but I don't care. I really don't. Here is another government's statistic, and I know this is very small. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. I can't. It's not getting bigger for me. There, just a little bit. Okay. This is information that was discovered by Freedom of Information request. The top graph is heart attacks, cardiac conditions, and admissions in public hospitals in Victoria. So, as you can see, from about January 2018, it's a fairly straight line. Not too many changes. There were some ups, some downs, but not many. All through COVID, all through this pandemic that was killing everybody, there were a couple of declines in the rate of hospitalization for cardiac conditions. But then something happened in June 2021, and these admissions started to rise, and they shot up so fast to between June 2021 and October 2021. That's when it peaked. But can you see behind there? There is a light blue line that runs almost identically to the dark blue line, which is monthly presentations. The dark blue line is monthly presentations with cardiac problems. The light blue line is the number of jabs for COVID being administered. And as they started around January 2021, it actually started in February 2021, but I may not be able to see that here. As the jabs started, and they increased the number of jabs that were being given, all of a sudden the admissions for cardiac problems went up. And as the compliance with jabbing fell, and you can sort of see behind that dark blue line, that light line goes down, the admissions for cardiac problems go down. And then there's another increase in jabbing and a smaller peak, but a peak all the same. And the correlation is so clear here, and this is being completely and absolutely ignored. There's a new paper that just recently came out. I'm trying to see if I can see the date here. It's Peter Doshi, who was the head of the Cochrane collaboration. He is the lead author here. And what they found is that 1 person in 800 who gets a COVID jab in randomized trials will have a serious adverse event. 1 in 800. Now, when I first started working with the AVN back in 1994, there was a medical definition for a rare event, a rare adverse event, and it was anything more than 1 in 10,000. So rare was considered anything more than 1 in 10,000. We're told that serious reactions after these jabs is rare, but that's a lie, because 1 in 800 are having serious adverse events according to this study. And it says here, methods: secondary analysis of serious adverse events reported in the placebo-controlled phase in the randomized clinical trials of Pfizer and Moderna mRNA COVID-19 vaccines in adults. So this data came from the pre-approval, pre-provisional approval, pre-EUA approval of these jabs. So they knew when this was foisted upon the general public, upon children, upon infants, they knew that these things were going to cause massive numbers of serious adverse reactions, and they did it anyway. If that's not a criminal act, I don't know what is. I don't know how many of you got a chance to watch Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s interview with Joe Rogan. It was brilliant. If you haven't watched it, please make some time. Watch at least the first hour. It's a 3-hour-long interview, so I watched it in phases. I couldn't watch the whole thing at once. But it's really brilliant, and if there is a God, he will become the next president of the United States. And I think that we will see the end of mandatory vaccinations there and maybe a return to sanity. But I'd like you to see this short clip where Kennedy is talking about Nigeria and the situation there and the comparison between Nigeria and the United States when it comes to these cases of reactions and deaths.
This is the first respiratory illness in the history of medicine where you could go into the hospital with a positive PCR test and symptomatic, and the hospital will say, there is nothing we're going to do for you. You go home till your lips turn blue, until you can't breathe, and then come back here and we're going to give you 2 things that'll kill you: intubation and remdesivir. Meanwhile, we're depriving people of drugs that are proven, of Zithromax, of ivermectin, of hydroxychloroquine, that were proven. The countries that use those drugs had a fraction of the deaths we did. Why is it, if what we were doing worked, why did we have the highest body count of any country in the world? We have 4.2% of the global population. How in the world did we get 16% of the COVID deaths? It doesn't make any sense. Meanwhile, nations that avoided vaccines and gave their populations ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and other early treatments, many of them didn't even have a pandemic. Nigeria has the highest malaria burden in the world. So almost all the population is on hydroxychloroquine. They take it once a week. It's called Sunday Sunday. Everybody takes it on Sunday. And it also has the highest river blindness burden in the world. So a large part of the population is on ivermectin. The death rate in Nigeria was 14 people per million population. The death rate in our country was 3,000 per million population, 200 times what they had in Nigeria. Nigeria had a 1.3% vaccination rate.
Okay. Well, you can't argue with those statistics, can you? Though a lot of the mainstream media who've been ignoring him are trying to argue with them. But he actually is getting his message across. He's been on many, many programs, and running for president has given Bobby Kennedy a platform that I think is going to reach so many millions or tens of millions or, God willing, hundreds of millions Americans, so that when they try the next scamdemic on, when they try and bring out another fear porn campaign, hopefully enough people will be aware of what happened before that they won't buy it again. And when Kennedy was speaking with Joe Rogan, and if you want to see the event, it's called the Joe Rogan Experience. It's on Spotify, but yet you can also find, I think, the whole thing on YouTube, I'm pretty sure. Kennedy's had a couple of his speeches taken down off of YouTube, just like the Ruddock, the MLC from New South Wales, had his maiden speech taken down. So the same thing that's happening with censorship in Australia is happening in the United States, where they have a First Amendment that guarantees freedom of speech. There you go. But one of the things that Kennedy's been asked about on Joe Rogan, and also on a town hall where he spoke a few days ago, they were questioning what he said about there being no placebo-controlled trials for any vaccine. And this is the thing. It's not. This didn't start with COVID. This situation goes back since we've started using vaccines. And he brought up the fact that as the Children's Health Defense, which is an organization that he started, they were trying to get Anthony Fauci to provide them with even one study that showed that a vaccine that was currently licensed had undergone a placebo-controlled trial, randomized controlled trial with an inert placebo, like a sugar pill or saline solution. And Fauci said, "Oh, I've got that, but I'll have to send it to you," and he never did. So they sued him and the HHS to find it, and after a year, the HHS had to admit that they couldn't find one study that actually scientifically tested any vaccine for safety. And this is, I guess, a clip that talks about that. Please explain how HHS, which is Health and Human Services, justifies licensing any pediatric vaccine without first conducting a long-term clinical trial in which the rate of adverse reactions is compared between the subject group and a control group receiving an inert placebo. And the answer was, inert placebo controls are not required to understand the safety profile of a new vaccine and are thus not required. And I'll just go to the highlighted section at the end. In cases where an active control is used, in other words, like the adjuvant or a different vaccine, the adverse event profile of that control group is usually known, and the findings of the study are reviewed in the context of that knowledge. This is the state of science when it comes to vaccinations, and drugs too, to be honest with you. But I may have mentioned this before, probably 25 years ago. I spoke with the then head of the Department of Health. His name was Dr. Gavin Frost, and I asked the same question: why is it that we don't use an inert placebo to test vaccines? And just to explain, in a real scientific study, you would have a control group. So you'd have two groups. And let's say there's 1,000 people altogether that you're testing. 500 of them in one group that gets the actual vaccine, 500 in another group that gets the placebo or an injection of saline solution. An inert placebo means something that has no effect on the body physiologically. So you would have 500 getting the vaccine, 500 getting the placebo injection. The vials look exactly the same. You don't know what you got. You don't know whether you're in the placebo group or the control group. The doctor or nurse who's administering the injection doesn't know. There's just a code on the bottle, and as I said, the vial looks exactly the same, whether you're getting the injection that has the vaccine or the placebo. And at the end, after all 1,000 people have been followed for 2, 3, 4 years, and we can see how many of each group got the infection they were supposed to be protected against, how many in each group had a reaction, and what the reaction was, then and only then would you be able to say, okay, according to this study, in the vaccine group, we had 2% of the people who had reactions. In the control group, we had 0% of the people who had reactions. In the vaccine group, we had 10 people who got the infection. In the control group, we had 5 people who got the infection. I'm just making these numbers up out of thin air. Then and only then can you say the benefits of this injection outweigh the risks, because you know what the benefits are and you know what the risks are. That has never been done for any currently licensed pediatric or adult vaccine, including the COVID experimental jabs. And without that test, without that study, no conclusions can be drawn as to the effectiveness or the safety of these products. And we have been using them and forcibly using them in children, in infants, and now in adults around the world. And that is a crime against humanity. That is something that needs to stop. We need to go right back to the drawing board. Show us the science. Unless you can show us the science, don't you dare tell us that we have to take these things or give them to our children. And the really sinister thing about this ACMA situation, where they are trying to censor what they consider to be mis and disinformation, is the fact that they would consider studies, they would consider that letter from Health and Human Services to be mis and disinformation because it is inconvenient for you and for other people who are watching this to actually know that that's what occurred. So God bless Bobby Kennedy Jr. May he have his voice, his poor voice that he believes has been adversely affected by vaccines. That is not his normal speaking voice. He has an autoimmune condition and he thinks that it's from vaccines. May his voice be loud and strong, and may it echo around the world so that those in power and those who are governed will know the truth about these vaccines and will be able to protect themselves and their children. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I'm feeling a little giddy because I can actually see you guys, but unless you have any questions, I may say good night. And I will let you know that next Sunday night I am going to have Kathy Scarborough from Vaccinations Informing South Australia. I think it used to be Vaccinations Information South Australia. Visa is the name of the group, and I did have a name change, and I'm silly, I didn't remember exactly what it is. But she's going to be speaking with me next Sunday night. And I will be having probably at least one midweek event as well. I will advertise it when that happens. Oh yes, Kate, that is such a good book. Kate just said, Fooling Ourselves on the Fundamental Value of Vaccines. This is the only book of its kind that I'm aware of. Most books cover either effectiveness or safety or both. Fooling Ourselves, it's an Australian book. Greg Beatty is a statistician. The information is taken directly from the Australian government, and it is discussing the necessity of vaccines. Are vaccines necessary, and did vaccines save lives? And his graphs have been approved by the government. When I say approved by the government, he had to, because he got government data, he had to actually show them the graphs before he published the books, and they did not tell him that he couldn't publish it. So they didn't actually say, yeah, these are wonderful grafts, we love it, love what you've done here. They just said, yes, go ahead, you can publish that. So it is a fantastic book. You can find it on the AVN's website, and you can also find it on Greg's website, which is Vaccination Dilemma. I think it's called vaccinationdilemma.com.au. So yeah, I will leave you to it. I hope you all have the most wonderful week, and if you feel like, tuning in, don't forget to hit subscribe, and if you want to like, that would be great. That would help me with the algorithm. And I will see you next Sunday night or during the middle of the week on Under the Wire. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.